Records are about aspirations, about success, about being the first, the fastest, the highest, the furthest, the youngest, the best. Who has the most? Who is the greatest? Records are the very essence of sporting achievement. A benchmark of success, linking the past to the present and beyond. Brazil, the home of the beautiful game. A nation whose people live and breathe football. And Edson Arantes de Nascimento was no different.
Nós íamos para a escola, primeiro, segundo ano. E à tarde,
in the afternoon, we'd all play football in the street or on small pitches.
E a minha mãe, ela nunca.
But my mum never wanted me to play football.
Ele ficou parado alguns jogos.
My mum would say, "I don't want you to play. I don't want you to become a footballer. Look at your father. He's injured, and now we've got serious problems.
Você vê aí o que aconteceu com seu pai? O seu pai está aí machucado.
We don't have enough money to buy food.
Sério?
I want you to be a doctor or a teacher, but definitely not a footballer."
Jogador de futebol. E o meu pai falava, olha, o futebol é
My father told me football is a gift from God,
deu esse presente de futebol.
and God gave you this gift,
Da mesma forma que Deus
just as he would give a musician a gift, a singer, guitar player or piano player. They all have that gift, and God gave you the gift of playing football.
E para você, Deus te deu o presente de jogar futebol. E aí eles convenceram a minha mãe.
My father then convinced my mum to let me train,
Conversaram com a minha mãe,
and I went and trained with Santos at just 15 years old.
quando eu tinha 15 anos.
So at that age, I trained for the first time with Santos.
E no primeiro treino,
And after just one training session, they signed me up.
o treinador do Santos na época,
E o Pelé, quando a gente viu, quando ele chegou com 15 anos, a gente já sabia.
We knew straight away that Pelé would be a genius.
Porque
He was just a kid,
o moleque com 15 anos
and he was already training with the big players.
aprendeu.
And that was very difficult.
Eles estavam no grupo.
He trained with the professionals.
Tite, Alves, Veca, aquela turma grande.
He learned from these players, and you could see by the way he touched the ball that he'd be a great player.
Cada bola já via que era um fantástico jogador, ia ser um grande jogador.
principalmente com
I didn't
16
expect
anos
to
de
be called
idade,
up to the Brazilian team.
nem era ainda
I was only
titular do
16 and I
Santos
wasn't
Futebol
even a
Clube.
regular for
Já tinha
Santos.
jogado no Santos.
I'd only played a few games.
Os jogadores do
I played
Vasco
for this
como
combined
jogadores do
Santos and Vasco 11, a team made up of players from both teams. We played a tournament in the Maracanã.
16 para 17.
I was only 16, but the Brazil squad was being put together for the 1958 World Cup at that time. Brazil's coach, Perillo, was watching and saw me playing in a Vasco shirt and must have thought, God, I'm going to call up that little black kid there.
Aquele negrinho lá, aquele...
Pelos treinamentos, os jogos amistosos.
In the training sessions and in the friendlies, we soon saw why a kid of only 16 or 17 had been called up to the Brazilian national team.
16 para 17 anos.
When he was starting out back then, he was already peerless,
Ele de fato
just
ele
world class.
era ao concurso, ele era fora de série, ainda com essa idade, começando.
que foi muito importante para mim.
What was really important for me in 1958 was that I picked up an injury playing for Brazil against Corinthians. It was a training game we played at the Pacaembu before travelling to Europe, but I injured my knee.
Para a Europa. E eu machuquei o joelho.
Pelé was selected for the Brazil squad which travelled to Sweden for the 1958 World Cup. He missed the opening two group fixtures, a win against Austria and a draw with England through injury, but was declared fit for the crucial match against the Soviet Union. Pelé helped Brazil to a 2-0 victory and a place in the knockout stages.
Porque a seleção de 58
The national team in 58 had Gilmar, who was one of the best keepers in the world back then.
tinha o
We had Didi,
Didi,
one of the best central midfielders in the world. We had Garrincha, and we had Vavá. He was the best striker around back then. God, we even had Nilton Santos, the best left-sided player to have ever appeared in South America. So individually, it was the best national team we've had, without any doubt at all.
Was the only goal of the game and sealed Brazil's place in the semi-final.
A visão que ele tinha de gol, a habilidade.
He had incredible vision and ability. Everything came so naturally to him.
Os outros não tinham a mesma.
Other players didn't have the same technique or ability that Pelé was already showing at that age.
O Pelé já mostrava dentro dessa idade.
France were the opponents in the semi-final in Stockholm. At half-time, Brazil led 2-1. But the second half belonged to Pelé. In the space of 23 minutes, the precocious teenager scored a hat-trick. The match finished 5-2, and Brazil were in the World Cup final.
A lot of journalists wrote at the time, Pelé's just a 17-year-old kid. Look at all the responsibility he has. How can he be feeling? And I thought, my God. But in that national team, I actually didn't have that much responsibility. That lay with Nilton Santos, Gigi and Bellini. They were the older, more experienced players. I was just living my dream. I had no worries. I just wanted to play.
The final at the Råsunda Stadium in Stockholm saw Brazil face the host Sweden. Like the semi-final, Brazil once again led 2-1 at half-time. But 10 minutes into the second half, the carefree youngster produced a moment of magic.
The 1958 World Cup was the first time the Europeans had ever seen a trick, which we call the hat, in Brazil. Back then, the Europeans had never seen anything like it, and we took it with us from Brazil.
Mario Zagallo made it 4-1 in the 68th minute, before the hosts reduced the deficit on 80 minutes. But in the dying moments, Pelé fittingly had the final word.
I cried at the end of the game. Everyone came up to hug me, and I just cried. But back then, it was incredible. It was an unbelievable emotion.
Aged just 17, Pelé became the youngest player to win the World Cup. Injury restricted him to just 2 appearances in 1962 as Brazil retained their title. 4 years later, against an increasingly cynical and aggressive approach, the Seleção were eliminated at the group stages. But in 1970, no one could...
The header I scored gave me a lot of joy. That I'd scored a header against Sweden in my very first World Cup. And then I scored again with my head in my farewell game against Italy as a world champion. So, that was marvellous.
In a career spanning 59 fights over 22 years, Bernard Hopkins in 2010 became the world's oldest boxing champion, aged 46 years, 127 days.
I can't think of any athlete in any sport who is as off the charts in terms of performing at an advanced age as Bernard Hopkins.
And on 3 further occasions, Hopkins extended his own record, even as he approached 50 years of age.
So in that respect, Bernard is extraordinary.
Given its physical and mental demands, boxing is predominantly a young man's game. But there are some notable exceptions. In 1994, George Foreman was 45 when he became the sport's oldest champion. At that time, having taken up boxing while in prison for a series of felonies, Hopkins was one of the world's finest light middleweights.
It's desire and hunger that drives Bernard Hopkins. And unless you've seen where he was born, unless you've seen where he was incarcerated, unless you've sat with him as he's talked for 2 or 3 or 4 hours about that life and what motivates him, that may be hard for people to understand.
In 1995, Hopkins won the world IBF middleweight title, and so began a record-breaking reign.
He's the longest-serving middleweight champion of all time, right? 20 defences, over 20 defences of the World Middleweight Championship is phenomenal.
Here's a guy that was released from prison, 10 years of parole. He's then defending his world title. He's still got 6 and 7 years of his parole to go. He just had a determination.
Hopkins lost his title aged 40, and retirement was widely seen as the next logical step. Hopkins thought otherwise. He made the step up to the light heavyweight division.
That signifies something which really very few boxers possessed. You know, he's got character, heart and desire in abundance. You know, when you lose in fights, it normally robs you of something, it takes something away from you, but not in Hopkins. He licked his wounds, he said to himself, where did I go wrong? And he's corrected it, and he's proven that by moving to light heavyweight.
Within 4 years, Hopkins had his sights on another world title. After a majority draw decision in the first bout, a rematch against Jean Pascal on the 21st of May 2011 saw Hopkins on the verge of history. Victory would see him break George Foreman's record to become the oldest boxing champion.
Pascal is young, he's hungry, he's very, very strong, you know, but Hopkins just goes in and does what Bernard Hopkins does. In the middle of the fight, he's winning the fight so comfortably, it's a world championship fight, he starts to do press-ups in the middle of the ring, you know, but that's just to offset the other guy in the other corner who's looking at him, and this guy's saying to himself, what's going on? This is a world title fight, but my opponent's doing press-ups in the corner. He's got inside of his head, and he's already beaten that guy.
The judges agreed, and Hopkins became a record breaker, aged 46 years and 127 days.
He can make you look so ordinary, makes good fighters, world-class fighters, look ordinary because they don't have the tactics and the skills and the mindset of a Hopkins. He's a real, what you call an old-school fighter.
Bernard really had no right to win the light heavyweight title. He had no right to get the wins he got past about the age of 42, 43. That was just pure desire, pure determination.
I don't know of a fighter who has been as dedicated to training as Bernard. And Bernard doesn't just train 8 weeks for a fight. Bernard trains 365 days a year. By training, I don't necessarily mean in the gym, but Bernard is careful about what he eats 365 days a year. He does some exercise every day. He takes care of his body as well as any fighter ever.
Boxers are rare athletes, and you can tell the really good ones. They're the ones that get up in the morning when they've got $300 million in the bank, and they run like they're staying in the cheapest motel on the edge of town and living in a car on alternate nights. They run, they train like they've got no money. Bernard Hopkins still trains like a poor man who is just one arrest away from going back to prison.
Hopkins attempted to defend his title against Chad Dawson. He lost in controversial circumstances, which led to a rematch, in which he was also defeated.
He would have been extremely disappointed to lose that fight. But if you look at it's a test of his character again. He's come back after that fight.
On the 9th of March 2013, Hopkins fought the then holder Tavoris Cloud, intent on regaining his title.
Hopkins schooled him. He's made a world-class fighter look like a novice, really. And, you know, to do that, and a fight of that magnitude didn't bother him at all, just it was another day at the office.
Aged 48 years, 238 days, Hopkins broke his own record as the oldest boxing champion. Before the end of 2013, he retained his title against Kevin Murat. And in April 2014, successfully defended it yet again, beating Bibert Shumanov to extend his own record, aged 49 years, 94 days.
It will not be beaten. That is a boxing record that's going to stay in the record books long after I'm gone.
As he's got older, he's learned how to be more cunning, and uses every bit of guile and every bit of wisdom that he has, and he knows how to take out the right tool at the right time and use it and put it back in the box.
On the 8th of August 2014, Hopkins lost to Sergei Kovalev. But as he entered his 6th decade, he still harboured ambitions to regain the title and become the first boxing champion in his 50s.
Legacy is probably the driving factor for Bernard now. By fighting as long as he has, and fighting at a pretty good level as long as he has, he's carved out a niche that's his and his alone.
Better fighters than him, he would beat. Classier fighters than him, he would beat. Guys that banged harder than him, he would beat. Guys that were more marketable than him, he would beat. Bernard's thing is just that heart and desire, surviving all that he had to survive when he was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, before he was incarcerated as an adult when he was still only a child. All of that has made him stronger.
His name will be mentioned along the sides of Leonard and Hagler, Duran, Hearns, Benitez, the real greats of our sport. You know, Muhammad Ali, the great fighters of this sport. The name Bernard Hopkins will remain there forever.
In reality, this year's goal is to focus on the pre-season, learn a lot, and to be prepared for the first race. Then I can go from race to race, always giving it 100%. I'll be pleased if I get to the end of the season, having taken this opportunity and having given it everything that I've got.
I didn't think he'd gather enough points up to win the championship. I thought that he would be falling off a lot, learning things, picking himself up, dusting himself down and going off and doing it again. But boy, he was so solid that year.
In 2013, Marc Marquez made history. Aged just 20 years and 266 days, he became the youngest ever winner of the MotoGP Championship. Marc Marquez announced himself to the motorcycling fraternity just 56 days after his 15th birthday, when he made his debut in the third tier of MotoGP, the 125cc Championship. He soon became the first rider since Valentino Rossi to win 5 successive races.
It was very apparent at an early stage that he had got a lot of talent. And someone like Marc Marquez at the age of 14, 15 years old, it wasn't like just someone had put him on a motorcycle and gone out there and he was brilliant and fearless. He'd been doing it for probably 7 or 8 years before that. But yeah, it was very apparent to everyone in the paddock that Marc Marquez was going to be a star.
After honing his skills, Marquez won the 125cc Championship in his 3rd season and moved up to MotoGP 2.
He would have won that championship that year, but he had a couple of big crashes at the end. It sort of bit him. And in some ways, accidents like that actually do work because they start to make you reassess the way you're doing it. It's not just about turning the throttle and going the fastest. It's about putting it all together.
Marquez did just that in 2012 to win the MotoGP 2 Championship. The step up to the top tier of his sport, the MotoGP, was inevitable. For all his talent, the shift to bikes 60% more powerful would not be easy.
I knew when Marc Marquez got on a MotoGP bike, he was going to be fast because he had exceptional talent. I thought he was going to win probably quite a few races, but I also thought he'd be in an ambulance quite a lot, frankly, that first year, because I just know how those big bikes bite.
The difference between MotoGP and Moto2 is not only on the circuit, but off it as well. People recognise you much more. And it has a bigger impact with the press too. It takes time to adjust to that. But I don't want to think too much about it, because then you get nervous, you get butterflies in the stomach. So physically, I'll prepare myself as I always do, in the gym or on the bicycle and with motocross. I'll just try to get as fit as possible.
Marquez finished a creditable third in his debut race in Qatar and arrived at the next race in Texas full of confidence. But few expected him to become the youngest ever MotoGP race winner at just 20 years and 63 days.
I have fond memories of Texas in 2013. It was my second race, but the first that I'd won. We had trained there, and I saw a little chance. I was really fully focused on that weekend.
Marquez failed to finish on the podium in the next 5 races, but returned to winning ways at the German Grand Prix, the first of 4 consecutive victories.
I really wasn't expecting to win so many. My objective was just to be among the first 3.
And a lot of the other guys, the more experienced guys, you could see the frustration in them. They were trying harder. Where did this kid come from? How did he do this? We've been doing it for 5, 6, 7 years on the best equipment, and this young lad's come around with a great big smile on his face, and it was just having a giggle and going out there and beating them.
With countryman Jorge Lorenzo winning the next 2 races, the title seemed destined for Spanish hands. But disqualification in Australia hampered Marquez's chances with just 2 races remaining.
He kind of brushed himself down from that. I mean, it could have destroyed you. He lost 25 points that day. And then he went off to Japan and rode a very solid race and finished second, I think.
The title would be decided at the final race in Valencia, where Marquez needed to finish at least 4th to become world champion.
Goes through your mind, if I ride too hard, is the tyre going to go off? Is the bike going to go off? Is something going to happen? And trying to ride at a very high level, there's an awful lot going on around in your mind. If you go back over the years, someone like Ayrton Senna, Valentino Rossi and people like that, they're able to absorb more than Mr. Average, to think about the pit bull, to think about how many laps are going, and you have to be able to absorb all that information. And I think that Marc Marquez is like one of the greats.
Marquez rode coolly and calmly to finish 3rd, and duly became the youngest ever world champion, 99 days before his 21st birthday. Yet another record in an already extraordinary but still fledgling career.
Winning that competition was unexpected, and in the end, it was incredible. And because of that, it will always be a special year in my memory.
Marquez remained grounded and didn't let his debut success go to his head. The following season, he retained his title.
Marc Marquez is at the age and has the skill and ability to beat Valentino Rossi's records, which is something rather special, 9 world championships. And he's known as the GOAT, greatest of all time. Now, Marc Marquez potentially can beat that.
I'm fully focused on winning in every race and always give 100%. And every year I have the dream of winning the title. I was very lucky that in the races in 2013 and 2014, I broke records. It's very clear records are another factor we have. It's another type of motivation for me.